In the first video of this two-part series, we looked at the Scherzo from Beethoven's Opus 28 and got a succinct illustration of what makes a scherzo. And in this video, in order to get a more robust example of a scherzo, we'll be looking at another and a bigger one, this time from his Opus 18, number 1. This video will go over the whole movement, not just the middle section, which, again according to Schoenberg, is what really distinguishes the scherzo from the minuet. Here's that list of scherzo characteristics from the last video, and which was extrapolated from Schoenberg's famous textbook. We'll see at the end of this video how this movement from this string quartet stacks up against it. Here's a basic diagram of the form. As just mentioned, and as discussed in the previous video, it's primarily the middle or B section that distinguishes a scherzo as such, particularly its unstable modulatory character, indicated by this wavy arrow here. To start with, though, this piece has a characteristically fast tempo and, like many but not all scherzos, a 3/4 time signature. And these 10 measures on the screen, which is nothing more than a single sentence, constitute the entire part 1 of the scherzo. Let's listen. This seems to start in F major, but because it goes so quickly to a cadence in C major, it's really only a conjecture at this point what main tonality is intended. In reality, this first section sounds more like a transition than an opening idea. That the previous movement ended on a D minor chord doesn't help matters much. The middle, or B section, is divided into several distinct subsections. Let's go ahead and listen to the whole section, then examine those subsections more carefully, since after all, it's this middle section that's the real distinguishing feature of a scherzo. Here are those subsections, marked off with the vertical brown lines, to better follow in the score. Now to find out how this is put together. Here's the start of the B section again from the previous slide. And right from the start, Beethoven throws a curveball by starting with a sudden, distant modulation to the key of A flat. As we just saw, part 1 ended with a strong cadence on the chord of C major. So this new key in 4 flats represents quite a jump, harmonically speaking, and it's set off further with a sudden dynamic change from forte to piano as well. This sort of key relationship is called a chromatic mediant, and it's often featured in Beethoven's music, and indeed it will return later in this very movement. Not only this distant harmonic jump, but the melodic material is new as well, though it has a disguised relationship to the opening material. Let's listen to this sudden change by itself. After 3 bars of this new A-flat material, Beethoven sequences the whole thing down a third to touch briefly on the key of F minor, the relative minor of A-flat major, but also the parallel minor of F major, which will turn out to be the home tonality for this movement. Now Beethoven gives a version of the opening material of the A section, only here it starts in D flat, yet another unexpected key, and then, with a quick augmented 6th chord, resolves to what turns out to be one long stretch of dominant harmony in the home key of F major. Here it is together with what we just heard, everything on the screen now. Now the characteristic feature of a scherzo is its unstable middle section, specifically one that modulates by sequence, and the middle section of this movement really only consists of these 14 measures on the screen, since the retransition, as we'll find out in just a moment, is really just that long dominant chord just mentioned. So although this segment certainly fits into Schoenberg's formal scheme, The irony is that it's really another version of Part 1, suddenly back with a vengeance. The reason it works well in the context of this middle section is that it never was a harmonically stable entity in the first place. Let's listen to them one after another. Beethoven was perfectly aware of this harmonic confusion, of course, and makes sure to sort things out in Part 3. So in just these 14 measures, Beethoven has given us not only new melodic material to cope with, as well as a false recapitulation of our opening material, but several different keys, more or less strongly suggested, before arriving at the start of the retransition in measure 25, which is just after the measures shown on screen here. This is all this video will have to say about the middle section proper. The rest will be an analysis of the remainder of the movement. Up until this point, the entire piece has been very slippery, harmonically speaking, and Beethoven realizes that it's time to pin things down, which is what he starts to do here, with what turns out to be 12 measures of dominant harmony, including a cadential 6/4 chord in the parallel minor, highlighted here, which was a standard trick used by classical composers. Let's listen. This is quite an extended road sign, as it were, and lets his listeners know that the music will likely be home once it all resolves. Once the original sentence indeed returns, in measure 37 here, Beethoven makes sure to have it cadence in the home key of F major, not C major as originally. For comparison, here's the original sentence over top the recapitulated version we just heard. So, whereas in Part 1 the sentence ended loudly on a C major chord, which was indeed the dominant chord, here in Part 3 it's extended a bit and ends very quietly, triple P, on the tonic chord of F major. This principle is more often found in the larger forms, such as Sonata Allegro, but it's done here for the same reason as it is there. That is, Beethoven puts the return of the A section entirely in the tonic of F major in order to balance out the harmonic digressions he's just taken his listeners on. In fact, he did this also in the Scherzo of his Opus 28 from the last video, which is even smaller in scale than this piece. So it's the harmonic uncertainty of both the middle section as well as of the first section that needs to be balanced by a liberal dose of tonic, which is what we just got and will continue to get till the end of the Scherzo, and which, taken all together, the whole of Part 3 plus coda, that is, this takes up over half the piece. This is Part 3 by itself again. After this, the music goes in for a fairly lengthy coda, which spends most of its time in the tonic F major, and so, harmonically speaking, helps to further anchor the movement in that key. Let's listen to the entire coda, also starting down in the corner, and then note a few things about it before wrapping up. As a matter of fact, Schoenberg, in his textbook, doesn't refer to this passage as a coda, but because it does nevertheless fit into other textbook definitions of a coda, and because it's easier to understand that way, this is why it's referred to that way here. In any case, all of what we just heard is derived from the opening material, and aside from a temporary emphasis on the subdominant here, which helps to cool things off, and which is similar to what happens in Part 3 of the Scherzo of his Opus 28, it's pretty much in the tonic throughout. And this extraordinary passage here is a good example of what Schoenberg refers to as liquidation. That is, any sense of motif is dissolved, or liquidated, into these steady quarter notes. Let's listen through to the end. These syncopations are the last of the rhythmic tripping points in the movement, and so looking at those original points again, it seems this scherzo is an even better textbook example than the shorter one of the last video, though it hardly feels like textbook music. And though it may seem like the music is safe and sound by the end, the dotted repeat bars plunge the music right back to the A-flat tonality that started the middle section, incidentally making for another chromatic median relationship. And after the scherzo ends for the second time, the trio that ensues also quickly runs away to other harmonic territory. That's it for this video and for this little two-part video series. I hope you've enjoyed learning something about this scherzo in particular, and something about scherzos in general. This is Cliff Pinchon. Thanks for tuning in.